Is a great question. So make it ambitious and ambitious as possible, but also make sure you've got someone who's accountable for delivering it, and that also you're really taking the time to look at this as a business transformation exercise.
Hello and welcome along to this Lloyds Bank Credible Transition Plans in Practice video series hosted in association with Edie. I'm your series host and Edie's publisher, Luke Nicholls, and in this series we're sitting down with industry leaders from across business, academia, policy and investment to discuss the real-world implications and transformative potential of credible transition plans. And in this episode, we're going to be getting practical. We're going to be delivering up 5 top tips when it comes to implementing transition plans in your organisation. And to take us through those steps, I'm delighted to be joined here by Joy Newton, the Director of Climate and Sustainability Strategy for Lloyds Bank Corporate and Institutional. So let's get into those steps.
Thanks for having me, and really looking forward to getting into the conversation around transition plans.
The first step is measuring, analysing, and then setting science-based targets. So what does this initial step look like for you and your clients that are engaged in developing a transition plan?
And there's even a lot in what you've just said. So I think even rolling it up the next level up to kind of ambition, and really being able to set, what is the ambition for you and your business in terms of transition, and what does that mean in terms of targets, whether that be science aligned targets, science based targets, all of the kind of different standards and methodologies that you can look at in that space. I think one of the things that we hear from clients a lot is, ambition is one thing, but where is your ambition relative to your peers, your sector, then also outside? Is there kind of, a strategic edge or a competitive edge also when you're considering ambition, and really how far is that going to take you when it comes to it?
And then, so I guess then moving through, and the second, perhaps one of the most important steps of them all is strategizing for decarbonisation. So what for you makes an effective decarbonisation in the context of developing and then delivering a credible transition plan?
It's huge. And I guess on the kind of first pillar of ambition, second pillar is really when you look at action.
Mm.
And, when you've set your ambition and you know where you want to get to, the action is really how you're going to get there. So it's essential. And I think, it really differs in terms of sector and business model at the core. So you have some businesses, who need to transform their whole business model, look at alternative revenue streams, whereas then you have other organizations who maybe just need to make tweaks to what they're doing. And so it can be quite different when you look at the actions that organizations take. I think the big ones that we typically tend to see and hear from clients are, make sure that you're being realistic in what you're setting. So make it ambitious and ambitious as possible, but also make sure you've got someone who's accountable for delivering it, that it's properly embedded in your decision-making process, and that also you're really taking the time to look at this as a business transformation exercise. So really looking at, the cost implications, where you're allocating capital, have you got the right capability, capacity, all of those things. And I think if you've got the right accountability at that level, it should drive the right investment for really being able to have a real economy transition.
Yeah, you're touching on the steps that we're about to get into as we go actually here, so this is good. But I wanted to draw in some of that research that I referenced earlier on in this Lloyds Bank, the reporting versus reality report, which we touched on several times throughout this series so far. And within that, one of the key findings I thought that stood out was that almost half, or 46% of executives reported that aligning on strategic ambition is a really key challenge as they develop their credible transition plans. With, I think, the commodities and agriculture industry stood out as ones that were feeling that challenge a lot. So my question is, how can credible transition plans be developed and utilized in ways which drive greater alignment around company sustainability and net zero strategies? Do you have any sort of tips or advice for that?
Yeah, it's hard. I wouldn't shy away from the fact that it is really challenging, and there's also a plethora of standards and different things emerging on transition. So sometimes it's coming down to what is the core thing that you're trying to achieve? What are the things that you're doing, and almost trying to structure your strategy in a way that tells that story in the best way possible, because there is so much noise, and I think it's really easy to be distracted by that noise and by the kind of trying to comply with multiple voluntary standards. And it really is just looking at the heart of it. What is going to help you on your journey? Because we know for certain organizations, for certain sectors, it's not linear. And so you really need to understand, when you're making decisions in the round and really with transition at the heart of your decision making, there will be trade-offs, there'll be unintended consequences. So it's really about taking the time, taking stock to be able to process what those are, make the assumptions, and then, follow through on the decisions.
Indeed. Back to the steps. Step 3 is engaging stakeholders and building transparency. So we touched on this already a little bit just now. So how can credible transition plans help to drive that engagement in a transparent and meaningful way, and ensuring accountability right from the top, from the board?
Is a great question. And I think there's kind of two ways that I'd look at stakeholder engagement. The first is internal. You have to have it right from the top in terms of looking at it. So having someone who is accountable for, the overall objective and your overall ambition, but then also having people who are accountable, responsible for the key results, and making sure that everybody in the organization knows what their role is in contributing to those key metrics and key outcomes. And I think, internally, there's a lot that needs to be done to win kind of hearts and minds when you're looking at making quite big business transformation decisions. And so it's really important that all of those people feel that they're on the journey and everybody's on the kind of journey together. And then I guess the other element I'd look at is when you're looking at external engagement, one of the key things that we see as being really crucial for the success of transition plans is advocacy in this space. So being able to look at what are the working groups, forums, what's your sector doing on transition plans as a whole. Some of the biggest challenges that we see are things like data standardization. So if there is, already a kind of a concept or an idea, or, you're not starting from zero, there may be a really good opportunity there to kind of form a bit of a coalition in terms of what your sector is looking at and what the kind of key materiality points for your sector also are. So then you've got organizations in the sector who may be a little less mature, who, can learn quick, learn fast. And ultimately, we all want to get to that 2050 net zero goal. So it's in all our best interests.
Yeah, two great points. So accountability internally, kind of in using the framework almost as a way of driving accountability for sustainability and net zero across the board, and then using it also as a tool for external engagement. That takes us nicely on to step 4 then, which is investing in people and skills. So a stat I'm going to throw in from the top, referring back to that reporting versus reality report conducted by Lloyds Bank. 37% of corporates within that cited a lack of expertise as a major barrier for developing out their credible transition plans. So Joy, what's the relationship between transition plans and green skills? How can this so-called skills gap be addressed through the development and rollout of credible transition plans?
Yeah, and it's a great point, and something we hear, from industry, from clients quite often is there is a skills gap, and also trying to identify the skills they need, because it changes quite often, is also a challenge. So being able to kind of understand what are the key skills that you need to be able to deliver your overall transition plan is the first step. So really understanding what are the key actions you need to take, have you got the right people to be able to complete those actions, and then the other element is making sure they've got the right capacity to be able to deliver it. And that is a key point, I think, when you look at the skills gap. There's great work being done though in organizations around apprenticeships, partnerships with the likes of universities, to really look at, where are the skills gap? Are there courses and different things that are addressing those skills gaps, which are presenting really great opportunities then for businesses to be able to identify, where those skills are, what universities they have, which overall then gets us more people in kind of greener skills, and will ultimately help us achieve the ambition.
As we talk through this, transition plans are about so much more than just reporting on what you're doing. It sounds like they're a mechanism, they're an unlocker almost for all of these potential challenges or pitfalls that might stop companies getting to net zero, right? So 5th and final step, aligning governance and reporting. So what challenges and opportunities exist for you when it comes to driving better alignment between reporting on climate action and actually embedding it within the governance structure of a business?
I think one of the big things is there's a big difference between climate reporting and climate action. And I think that's one of the things that we see is reporting for kind of, reporting's sake is one thing, but actually then being able to have the impact and reporting on that impact is the other core element. And I think that's where it gets, at the moment, we haven't quite got that balance right yet. And I think we are in a piece of, there's so many different frameworks, assessment standards, voluntary standards, that everybody is trying to do multiple things. So when you look at like Climate Action 100 Plus, Transition Pathway Initiative, TCFD, Climate Disclosure Project, CDP reporting, that there's so much, and they all have their own kind of reporting burdens for organizations when they're looking at this. And actually, when you look at how long it takes people to complete questionnaires, that's a lot of people working on reporting and not really focusing on what the action is. There's another train of thought, though, that, what gets measured gets managed, right? But I think we just need to be mindful of how much time we're spending looking at reporting. And ultimately, if we look at impact reporting, recognizing the point I made earlier around it's not linear, that will help in terms of being able to drive the action in the areas that we wanted to.
Yeah, well, on the subject of time, on that note, I'm afraid our time here is up. I'm going to have to draw this conversation and this episode to a close. So thank you so much, Joy. There you have it, our 5 key steps in order: measure, analyse and set science-based targets, strategise for decarbonisation, engage stakeholders and build transparency, invest in people and skills, and align governance and reporting. I hope you found those steps useful and insightful as you go about developing out and rolling out your transition plans. Do stay tuned for further episodes in this series. And in the meantime, if you'd like to read that full reporting versus reality report, which was referenced throughout this discussion, please either search for Lloyds Bank Credible Transition Plans or go to lloydsbank.com/credible-transition-plans. But for now, it's goodbye.